So, Dave, I'm very excited about this one.
I imagine you would be.
Yeah,
For you people, this is a big deal.
Describe to our listeners what I'm wearing.
You're wearing a Cubs, like this is any different, but a Cubs hat, a Cubs shirt.
Yes, that's right. And we're talking to a guy who's written books. He wrote Season for the Ages, which was a chronicle of the 2016 World Series. He was a co-writer of Cubs by Numbers, and he has a new book out. And, well, let's just get to it because Al Yellon is on the line with us.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Men Celebrity Interview with Rick and Dave.
So, Dave, in the Cubs literary world, there's one name that stands out. He was one of the first to dominate the internet. He has this site called Bleed Cubbie Blue, which all Cubs fans read.
Al, you should probably get that checked. That bleeding of the blue blood, you should probably get that checked.
Yeah. He's a treasure trove of Chicago Cubs information and angst. He's now got a book out called Chicago Cubs Firsts, the Players, Moments, and Records That Were First in Team History. Please welcome to the show, Al Yellon. How are you doing, Al?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So, I've been a fan of yours for years. Read Bleed Cubbie Blue religiously. What inspired you to write this book? Did we just lose you, Al?
No, but I just lost you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
In the middle of
Just like the Cubs yesterday.
I should warn you, Al. Dave is a White Sox fan.
He's forgiven.
Yes.
And this year, that's something.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Me and the other 11 are still coming to the
Yeah, this year, Al, we're in last place, and the White Sox are still worse.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah, exactly. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I'll be honest with you. The publisher came to me, which I thought was very flattering.
Oh.
They're doing this publisher is doing a series of these books. They're doing one on the Yankees, Red Sox, and Mets, and then they added Cubs. And I said, yeah, sounds great. So that's when I got to it.
You were also a TV director in Chicago at Channel 7, right?
I was. I was. I'm retired from that. So this is Bleed Cubbie Blue, and these book writing is kind of my retirement job.
So you entered into the Cubs world. Is it kind of as like you say, a hobby per se, or were you always a Cub fan? And it's a perfect extension.
I've always been a Cubs fan. Since I was a kid, grew up with WGN and all that. Like many people in my generation. I started writing a personal blog about a little more than 20 years ago, and it quickly became like 95% Cubs. And the folks who started SB Nation found it. Marcos Melitsis, who's one of the founders, is a Cubs fan. So he was reading my stuff before even Bleed Cubbie Blue. And that's when they offered me the spot. And eventually I took a retirement buyout from Channel 7 and started doing this as like I said, kind of my retirement job. It's been, it's kind of living the dream, really.
You mentioned that they're doing these books about all the other clubs, or probably just the popular ones. No one's doing the Tampa Bay Firsts book, probably.
Yeah, probably not.
But I think it's even more appropriate because the Chicago Cubs actually were the first, weren't they? The first franchise.
Well, that's right. And one of the things I mentioned right at the beginning of the book is that, if I wanted to do all the first for the franchise, they'd all be from like the 1870s.
Right.
But I didn't want to do that because nobody wants to read that. And, those are people that should be remembered because the franchise does go back more than 140 years. But I wanted to make sure that all the eras of the team were taken care of. There's a first in this book from last year. So I'm not going to reveal what that is. You'll have to get the book.
Okay.
But we run the whole gamut of Cubs history from 1876 to now.
And the Cubs have won so many championships. But
Shut up.
So let's go through the first championship team. Tell us about the personalities. I suspect there were some not so nice people on that team, perhaps, right?
Well, I don't know. The first Cubs World Series championship team was in 1907, and among the players who were famous on that team were the famous double play combination of Johnny Evers and Joe Tim. And of course, Frank Chance was the third they were immortalized in a poem, Tinker to Evers to Chance. But Tinker and Evers got into a dispute a couple of years before that championship. They were staying in a hotel somewhere on the road, and one of them, I forget which one of them got upset with the other because he left and went to the ballpark and didn't wait for him. And outside of necessary communications on the baseball field, those two did not speak to each other for more than 30 years.
I love that story.
No, seriously. And then in 1937, they had a ceremony at Wrigley Field that honored the 30th anniversary of that World Series team, and the two of them made up, and they were friends for the rest of their lives. They both died in the 1940s, so at least they had a good ending.
So they both were from German descent. That probably
no, I think they're Irish.
Okay, same thing. Yeah.
So first black player everyone knows was Ernie. First black coach was Buck O'Neill. But boy, they were late to the game with the first black manager, weren't they? I'm just reading your book.
Not really.
I mean, it was almost this century when they get their first black manager.
Right. And, Don Baylor did an okay job. Dusty Baker, the second black manager, did an okay job, wish he could have got the team a little farther in 2003. But, while you're on this topic, let me talk about the first black pitcher for the Cubs.
Okay.
Whose name was Sam Jones. And famously, he threw a no-hitter in 1955 in front of about 2,500 people. That was typical in those days, right?
A White Sox crowd.
Yeah, it was. So, the famous thing about that no-hitter is that he walked the bases loaded in the ninth inning and then struck out the side.
Wouldn't you love to know how many pitches he threw? They didn't keep track of that, or did they?
We actually know because they did keep track of that day. They kept track. It was 187.
Oh, my God.
And, nobody would do that today, but it was a different time. Pitchers didn't throw as hard as they do now. So, the other thing about Sam Jones is he had a couple of good years for the Cubs. And then they traded him to the Cardinals for a bunch of guys you've never heard of. Seriously, all the guys they got were like nobodies. And then the Cardinals eventually traded him to the Giants, where Jones had a really good year in 1959. And 1959 was a year when Ernie Banks won his second MVP award. The team was actually pretty good. They were in contention for a couple of months. They were over 500 at the end of July. And I can't thinking that if they still had Sam Jones, they might have made a run at the National League pennant in 1959 because the Dodgers won the pennant that year. They only had 86 wins. So
it could have been a Cubs-White Sox World Series.
Yeah, that would have been something, wouldn't it? It's just, one of those, we'll never know situations. But, and I mentioned that whole trade sequence in the book because it's just an example of how many bad trades the Cubs made in those days. They, picking up older guys who had been good 10 years earlier, and you knew they were done, but the Cubs thought, we can squeeze one more good year out of this player, and they were never right. But they kept trying, and they kept doing it. They did that for almost 20 years. They kept doing that.
There's a great story in Leo DeRocher's book about how Billy Herman, the Cubs Hall of Fame second baseman, was traded to the Dodgers, and it's something to do with them going out. The Cubs tried to get the Giants or the Dodgers, I forget who they traded him to, tried to get the general manager drunk, and in so doing they got themselves drunk, and they ended up trading him for nothing. It was just one of those. They've done that. Yes,
not heard that one before, but it would not surprise me at all.
And I know it's not the award. The MVP award has not always been called the MVP award, but who was the first Cub to win whatever incarnation of the MVP was?
Well, as you say, it's gone through a bunch of incarnations. The first Cub to win the award as we know it today was Gabby Hartman, who won it in 1935. But they had an award called the Chalmers Award, which is named after the guy who created it. He had a car named the Chalmers car, which is no longer sold. And he gave a bunch of money and created this award in 1911. And a guy named Frank Schulte, was a great player. Yeah, Wildfire. He was a great player in his day. He led the league in triples, home runs, did almost everything, and won that award, which is not really called an MVP, but it was sort of like what we know as an MVP today, in 1911. But in the book, I go through all that stuff, and basically, the credit really to Gabby Hartman, because the MLB only recognizes awards back to 1931, the current MVP award. So I kind of feel like Gabby Hartman is really the first Cubs MVP.
Didn't Gabby Hartnett have a bowling alley in Lincolnwood?
He did. Yes, he did.
Did he really? Wow.
He died in 1972, and it stayed open for many years after he died. It was on Lincoln Avenue in Lincolnwood.
Yeah, right by the original Illuminati's Pizza.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, Al, what was the first year that you became a Cubs fan?
1963. And, 1963 was actually a year where the Cubs were in first place in June. And that was, they had won a game over the Giants, and they went into first place in June. The first time they had been in first place that late in the year since 1945. So it's kind of a big deal, and they had a decent year. And, the Dodgers were just too good that year. The Cubs did finish with a winning record, though. That was their only winning record between 1946 and 1967.
They had 4 Hall of Famers on that team.
Yeah, that's right. And if you go to 1966, 3 years later, when they lost a franchise record 103 games, there were 6 Hall of Famers on that team.
Only the Cubs could do that.
Only the Cubs. Right.
They lost 106. 106
yeah, the other guy was 103. So, the other guy was Robin Roberts, who was a famous pitcher of the Phillies most of the 1940s and 50s, and he pitched in a few games for the Cubs at the end of his career.
Oh, my God.
I can only hope the White Sox are only going to lose 103 games.
Yeah, this year. That's the way it's going. So, this is what I love about your book. So I read the entire book the last couple of days, and I think just the random firsts. Like, tell us about the first Cubs triple play.
Oh, my God. Now you stumped me because, the honest truth is I wrote this book over a period of about 18 months, and I read it like I can't even tell you how many times, over and over and over, just to make sure everything was right. And to make sure there were no typos or other things in the, and so some of them are just kind of, they're so far into my brain that I'm honestly not recalling that
I
one.
get it. I wrote a book called Every Cub Ever, which is literally about every Cub ever. Mm-hmm. And whenever I do these interviews, they'll pull out Joe Schmo from 1947. Tell us about Joe Schmo. I'm like, let me get my book. I've got to read through it.
Exactly.
Yeah. No one remembers everything, so that's all right.
Right.
I see that Pat Hughes wrote the foreword. Pat, great guy.
Pat is the best. I mean, he's written the foreword for all 3 of my books. He is so gracious. I mean, I worked in broadcasting, as you know, and I met a lot of nice people. And Pat is not only one of the nicest people in broadcasting, the nicest people, period, I've ever known. He is so gracious and giving and generous. And we as Cubs fans have been so lucky to have him as the radio play-by-play announcer for almost 30 years. It's a tremendous record.
Yeah, we're not lucky with a lot of things, but we have
broadcasting. You've had some good broadcasting.
3 Hall of Famers in our lifetimes, which is pretty impressive.
No question. It's been and a lot of these guys, like you say, for Pat Hughes, they come and they stay for decades, and they become like part of your life.
They do. And I actually enjoy sitting out in the garage, lighting up a stogie and listening to the radio broadcasts of the show, because there's something about listening to baseball on the radio, and Pat Hughes just paints a picture, doesn't he?
He does. Sometimes the radio broadcast, and I got to be honest with you now, because so many everything is sponsored.
Right. That's
so,
true.
like everything has got to have an ad with it, and it does kind of interrupt the flow a little bit.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
Pat's voice is so smooth, and he describes everything so well that, you're not really missing anything if you can't be near a TV and all you've got is the radio, if you're in your car or whatever. Yeah. So, still Pat Hughes is, he's the gold standard, I think, of modern radio broadcasters, not just Cubs, but for any team.
If I can make a personal request to the score, who does the Cubs broadcast, if you can not get the adult diapers as a sponsor for next season, I'd really appreciate it, because you can hear the discomfort in Pat Hughes and Ron Coomer every time they have to read the ad about adult diapers. Although
they must be making a lot of money on those ads, because otherwise, that's really the only reason to do something like that, is you get paid the most money.
Well, you were in broadcasting, you know that there are no rules except give us as much money as you could possibly get, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So, all right, tell everybody where they can buy the book because it's a
minute.
Yeah,
there is one thing I wanted to mention about this book, and that we have one first that has never been published anywhere.
Oh,
and that is it's the first day that the W flag ever flew above the Wrigley Field scoreboard.
Oh, wow!
When I was researching this book, I was looking that up, and everything I came across that referred to the W flag in the first day that said, well, we don't know when the first day was. And it's like, well, I took that as a challenge. So if you read my site, you know that one of the things I like to do, especially in the off season, is take old photos and sleuth them.
Right.
If I have a photo that doesn't have a date on it, it's like I'm going to figure out when this was taken. So I went about locating some photos of Wrigley Field when the scoreboard was being built, and then what dates were played in 1 year where the flag couldn't have flown because of the way the scoreboard was constructed. And then I found what I call the Holy Grail, which is a photo that I can date to a specific game that was the first time. So that photo is in the book. Did you guys know that when the scoreboard was first built, the current, the so-called iconic scoreboard, it did not have the flag poles that are currently there with it. It has the U.S. flag and room for like the team flag standings of the teams.
No.
All it had on top was a flagpole on each end. And in between the end of one season and the beginning of the next, they changed that. So all of this is in the book. You want to find out when the first day the W flag flew over the scoreboard, it's in the book.
Well, you are retired. You got a lot of, that's great.
You got a lot of time on his hands. Where can people get the book?
Anywhere you buy books, your local bookstore, and I would strongly encourage people to patronize local bookstores because that's really the lifeblood of the business.
No.
Bigger stores like Barnes and Noble, Amazon, anywhere you buy books, you can get this book.
Oh, Bezos needs a new yacht.
Yeah, right.
So make sure you buy it.
Yeah, let's give him 40% of your profit, right?
Yeah, go to the local bookstore.
All right, thanks, Al, and best of luck to you. I really do enjoy Bleed Cubbie Blue. It's the best Cubs site out there.
Thank you. I do appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, have a good one. Bye-bye. And there he goes. Now you mock me.
Oh my God!
For being a Cubs geek.
Yeah. I didn't get a chance to ask if he has ever kissed a girl, but
you got to admit, I'm not the worst of all the Cubs geeks out there. Al's pretty high up there.
Yeah. Well, he's retired, so he has more time to devote to.
That is true.
Working.
So we have people to thank. We need to thank Brandon Herman, who scored this guest for us, Al Yellon. We need to thank Tony Lasano, the executive producer of Minutia Men Celebrity Interview from Opie Shows.
We didn't get a chance to ask him if the Cubs were the first team to employ the troughs in the bathroom.
Oh. Yeah, I bet they weren't, but I bet they were the last.
Right. Are they still?
Because they're still there. Yes, so Ed Silla with Radio Misfits. Great Talk Radio isn't dead. It just moved to a better place, radiomisfits.com. And we'll be back again soon, whenever we feel like it, for another episode of
Minutia Men Celebrity Interview.
The proceeding was a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Find our other great shows on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at radiomisfits.com. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?
If you cannot get the adult diapers as a sponsor for next season, I'd really appreciate it.